So as it's 3:30, I'm going to make a start now. I think that we're still going to have some people joining us as we go, so that would be wonderful. So my name's Paul Howard. I'm the Chief Executive of Lupus UK, and I'm really pleased that after some delay, we're now actually launching our new Hindi language resources on our website, which have been developed by researchers at University of Birmingham. So Yeh Hai Lupus, which means this is lupus, is a video about lupus in Hindi aimed at the South Asian community. And we are delighted to have this webinar to discuss lupus in people from South Asia, and to look at the reasons behind the development of this new resource and what we hope that it will do for the lupus community over the coming years. Just a few notes on housekeeping already. If you've joined us, if you're able to put yourself on mute, if you're not speaking, just so that we can hear the presenters clearly. I might pick out some people and mute them if they're not on mute as we go on. This event is being recorded and it's going to be uploaded to the Lupus UK YouTube channel. So if you miss any part of the event, you will be able to catch it later on. And if you've got any questions or any comments that you want to make throughout the event, please pop it in the chat box. We'll also have a question and answer session at the end of the event. But if you've got any questions or comments that come up as you go on, please feel free to share them, because we would love to hear those, and we'll pick out some questions later on as they come in. If you've just joined us, please share where you're joining us from in the chat box. Please introduce yourself to us, the hosts of the event, but also to everyone else who's been joining us. We'd love to hear your name and what institutions you may be joining us from, what organisations, and we'll see sort of where this information has been reaching so far as we then look to promote and advertise these new Hindi language resources further over the coming weeks and months. So I'm going to stop sharing my slide just for a moment and show you what we have now launched. We have launched the web page for Yeh Hai Lupus. So this is what we'll be talking about today. Primarily the video, which appears front and center on the web page, and here you'll be able to see that the video is split into lots of different sections, and we've got tips on how you can skip to those sections. We've got some additional resources that people may find useful, and we've got information about the various developers and contributors and the advisory board to this project. So this is available on the Lupus UK website at lupusuk.org.uk/Yeh Hai Lupus, and you can also find it under the What is Lupus menu header. So you can just go to the homepage of the website and then select What is Lupus and go to the Yeh Hai Lupus page. So we hope that you'll be able to help share this resource with people in the future. And now I will just share what we've got coming up in the event this afternoon. So after my introduction, we've got Professor Anisur Rahman, who will be giving an overview of lupus and the impact that it has for patients. We've got Rashmika and Santhia, who are two patients living with lupus, who are going to share a bit of their experiences of living with the disease. And we've got Dr. Kanta Kumar, who will be discussing the role of ethnicity in perceiving lupus. We'll have Mandeep Ubhi, who will be talking about the rationale behind developing the video and the various segments of the video, providing you with some detail about what's included. We'll then have Dr. John Reynolds and Dr. Shirish Dubey, who will be providing an overview of the importance of these types of information resources for patients from a clinician's perspective. And we'll close the session with some questions, if there are any, and any closing remarks. And so, one moment, I'll stop sharing that. Okay, so I'd like to hand over now to Professor Anisur Rahman, who is a consultant rheumatologist and researcher based at University College London Hospital, and he's going to be discussing what is lupus. Over to you, Anisur.
Thanks very much, Paul. So I've just been asked to give you 10 minutes as an overview of lupus from the patient's point of view, in as much as anybody who isn't a patient can do that. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to share my slides. Just do that now. Okay. Right, now I'm going to assume that you can all see this because I can't see you anymore. I can only see the slides. So if there's a problem, just shout out, otherwise I won't know. All right?
We can see that fine, Anisur.
Okay, so essentially I'm talking about SLE and the effects on patients, and really I'm doing this by imagining what I would think, or what people who I've treated would think, the first time they're diagnosed with lupus. What would be the questions people were asking? So what is it? It's a systemic autoimmune disease. Systemic means it can affect almost any organ in the body. Autoimmune means it's your immune system attacking yourself. And the prevalence in the UK is 1 in 1,000. It's rare. So you can see all those organs I've put on the slide. Any one of those can be affected by lupus. And you also get autoantibodies, which are antibodies to constituents of the body itself, like DNA. This is very characteristic of lupus. So this is a disease particularly affecting women. 90% are women, often presenting in young women, and it can present in many, many different ways, affecting many different parts of the body. So if I've just been diagnosed with lupus, what sort of person am I likely to be? I'm likely to be a woman. It's a 9 to 10 to 1 ratio. I was probably young when it started, because it tends to start in young people. It is an increased risk in Afro-Caribbean and South Asian people, also East Asian actually. So Afro-Caribbean is the big risk group, but also Asian, which of course is relevant to today's seminar. And it's really rare. So the prevalence is 1 in 1,000. And so if you consider somebody who's diagnosed with diabetes, they probably know somebody or know of somebody who has diabetes. Diabetes is a commonly found disease. But somebody who's diagnosed with lupus may never have seen or heard of anybody with lupus. The only time they might have seen it is on a medical drama like House. And by the way, in House, notoriously, it was never lupus. House always thought it was lupus and it never was. So if I'm this patient who's been diagnosed with this very rare disease that maybe I've never heard of, the first thing is, am I going to get better from it? So in the 1950s, the answer to that would have been terrifying. So these young people were told they had a 50% chance of surviving 5 years. That's the 1950s. Now, thankfully, things are very, very much better now due to the advances in treatment that have gone over that time. So it's nothing like that anymore. The disease can't be cured completely. In other words, it's not a question of the disease is serious as a 50% 5-year survival. People will live with the disease. It won't be cured completely. It's a question of living with the symptoms. Now, some patients do enter what's called remission. In other words, the disease completely goes away. It's as if they never had it. And that can be remission on drugs. In other words, you have to take medicine and you feel fine. And sometimes, much more rarely, remission off drugs. Sorry, have you, what, somebody is, sorry, what happened there? Somebody else started sharing.
Oh, I'm not sure, I'm afraid. And so if you're able to share your slides again.
Okay. Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Can you see my slides again?
Yep, you're back.
Right. So it's much more rare to get remission off drugs than on drugs, but people can enter remission. So the will I get better? It's possible to get better, have almost no symptoms. It's possible, but many people are left with some degree of symptoms. So this is about living with a long-term condition. So from the day I'm diagnosed with this rare condition, it's about living with it. What effect will it have on my life? So what are the commonest things that might happen? Rashes, which can be malar, that classic butterfly rash on the face, or areas of rash, for example, on the limbs or the ears, which are called discoid rashes. Photosensitivity, worse in the sunshine, have to wear sun protection factor. hair loss, mouth ulcers, fatigue, very, very common, and joint pain. Now, none of these things are life-threatening. So they're not serious in that you have to be in hospital, otherwise something really bad will happen to you. But that doesn't mean they're trivial at all. And this is what I always tell my medical students. So I say to them, imagine you're a young lady, actually a lot of them are young ladies. Imagine you're a young lady and you're feeling that your life is very miserable because your hair is falling out, you've got a rash all over your face, you can't go out in the sunshine. It's really affecting your quality of life. You feel tired all the time. So there's a big quality of life issue apart from the things which are actually life-threatening. But there are some more serious forms of SLE, and the main forms are kidney disease, blood disorders, nervous system disease, and chest and cardiovascular disease. Kidney disease. Now, often the people with kidney disease don't have any symptoms. This is very important. They may not feel ill early in the course of this kidney disease. So it's picked up by testing their urine for protein. So a patient who comes to a lupus clinic usually has their urine checked for protein. And sometimes if there's lots and lots of protein in the urine, that's the first sign of kidney disease and be caught early. Some present with what's called nephrotic syndrome, where they get a lot of swelling of the ankles and lots of protein in the urine. Some have high blood pressure or blood in the urine, but the real key for all of these people is to pick it up early. And usually they need a kidney biopsy because that will prove that the lupus is in the kidney, and there are different types of lupus in the kidney. So this enables the right treatment to be given. Now, it used to be that people with lupus ended up with things like dialysis and transplant. This is much, much less common now. If it's diagnosed and treated early, the outcome is good, usually. Blood disorders, the main constituents of the blood are platelets, white blood cells, and red blood cells. All of them can be affected by lupus. In other words, the levels can go down. If your platelets go down, it can make you bleed. If your white cells go down, neutropenia, it can make you prone to infection. And if your red cells go down, you have anemia. All of them can be treated with steroids, often at high doses, just as the kidney disease is often treated with steroids, and usually they need immunosuppression with other drugs as well. Brain lupus, there's a wide range of possible presentations. In fact, there are 19 possible categories, but actually many people with symptoms such as headache, anxiety, and depression, it's not due to the lupus getting into the brain. And actually, I did a seminar for Lupus UK about this just last week. There's a minority of cases where the lupus has actually got into the nervous system and inflamed the nervous system. It can be hard to pick up. Sometimes they do brain scans, but the treatment is steroids and immunosuppression for those severe forms, and the time to recovery could be prolonged. Finally, chest and cardiovascular disease, you can have inflammation of the lining of the heart or the lining of the lung. That's quite common and it can be painful, but reasonably easy to treat with steroids. Inflammation of the body of the heart, myocarditis, is rarer but more dangerous. Coronary artery disease, heart attacks and strokes are more common in lupus than in other people, and this is even true in younger women. So this is something to watch out for in a young woman with lupus. And antiphospholipid syndrome, which is a related condition, occurs in maybe 20 to 30% of patients with, 7 to 15% of patients with SLE. More have the actual antibodies. That can cause clots or miscarriages. But my take-home message, and another thing, because many of these patients are young ladies, are they concerned about their fertility? Will they be able to have a baby? And in fact, maybe 30 years ago, people with lupus were told, just don't get pregnant. It's a bad idea, don't do it. But this isn't true. Fertility is not usually a major problem, except in people who have developed lack of periods after cyclophosphamide. You do have to watch these pregnancies carefully though. So some patients have an increased risk of miscarriage, some have an increased risk of what's called the neonatal lupus syndrome, but it's only a 2% chance in people with certain antibodies. You have to watch the pregnancies carefully. And if they are watched carefully, the outcome is good. So many patients with lupus have successfully gone through pregnancy and had children. It's not the case that people with lupus can't have children, not the case at all. But they have to be watched carefully during pregnancy. So my take-home message is this. What can the patient who's been diagnosed with lupus expect? Long-term regular follow-up in specialist clinics. They don't get discharged because they have to be watched carefully. For example, by checking the protein in the urine. The blood pressure and urine protein are monitored regularly. Now, they may have symptoms over the years, persistent, irritating, not trivial symptom, hair loss, rash, joint pain. But these symptoms can be managed either symptomatically or with antimalarials like hydroxychloroquine, and don't usually need high doses of steroids or immunosuppressants. But there are forms of lupus, like the brain and the blood and the kidney, which do need those high doses of steroids and immunosuppressants. And the important thing is to pick that up quickly. So that's why people are regularly under the clinic. They come to the clinic so that these things can be diagnosed and treated early. And pregnancy often comes up in patients with lupus, and pregnancy is fine, but it needs to be monitored closely. And the advice we always give is try to get pregnant at a time where your lupus is under control, not when you're highly active. Thank you very much.
That's wonderful. Thank you ever so much, Anisur. So we've heard about lupus from a consultant and a researcher. So next, what we're going to do is pass over to Rashmika and to Santhia, who are both living with lupus, so that they can share their personal experiences of living with the disease and the impact that it has on their lives. So I think I'll hand over to Rashmika first, if she's happy to share her experiences.
Sure. All right. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Unlike the medical people taking part, I don't really have slides to share with you. So I was diagnosed in 2010 with lupus. I hadn't heard of it, didn't know what it was. I was lucky that when I had Reynolds as one of my symptoms, where my fingers go white, I went straight to a doctor and asked her how this comes about and what was the reason behind. And she luckily knew about lupus and said that we would have to do bloods and check through immunology. So that's how I found out that I have lupus as an illness. Started off on very high steroids and hydroxychloroquine. Also, the supplements of vitamin D were given to me in liquid form, which weren't very nice. Having said that, now over the number of years, I have slowly and gradually decreased my steroid intake to 0. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. Although you live with it for the rest of your life, you can come down in some of your medications with the help of your consultants and their advice of how to taper down your medication with trying to not have too many side effects. Home life, it changed quite a lot. My family really did take a while to understand, as we were both, as myself and my family were learning all about it from Lupus UK, various other materials given from our consultants at the hospital, also looking up on what the drugs that we were given, what they do, what side effects they have. And it was a case of arming yourself with as much knowledge about the condition is the best way forward with the help of consultants and doctors. I did have a biopsy and have lupus nephritis, although at a very mild stage. I have to pace myself, although I enjoy gardening and activities, so I still do a lot of that. Recently, the lockdown has prevented us from going swimming, which is something I'm really missing. As for attending like social functions, being part of an Asian family, we tend to sort of like go for the one day rather than a whole weekend, as some weddings and things actually do take longer. Medications down, hydroxychloroquine is the only thing I'm taking at the moment, and supplements. So other than that, I'm fairly active, still hold down and go to work, which I'm lucky. and I was able to take part in this project with the help of Yvonne Norton, who is Vice Chair of Lupus UK, who put my name forward. So I really kind of wanted to do something to give back to Lupus UK and to help any other families who, like me, was walking around in the dark, literally, and not understanding this condition. So I'm happy to help.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Rashmika. And if we hand over to Santhia now, so that she can share a bit about her experiences of living with lupus.
So hi, my name is Santhia. I have had lupus since January 2017. I am also a lupus nephritis SLE patient. So when I first got diagnosed, it was quite confusing because nobody in my family understood or knew anything about the disease itself, and neither did I. I literally thought my world was coming to an end. But over one mistake I did do is, because I didn't have the resources and the knowledge about SLE, I actually started relying on the internet a lot, and then I started to read all the negative side effects and what can happen to a patient, and then I didn't really digest the information quite well. And then when I did have my biopsy and then the treatment proposals all came along, then that's when I started to open my eyes a bit more to then understand my condition and accept it. Because I think for me at first it was more about just accepting the condition, because I have a healthy family, there's no one is sick, and I was the first one. So for me it was the acceptance. Eventually, once I understood the condition myself, there were some confusing factors here and there as my disease started to progress. Because I'm complex. I have lupus SLE, so my class is between 4 and 5. My consultant has always told me that I'm a complex lupus patient. And then trying to then explain it to my family members, at first they understood, but as time went on, I think every time I told them I was unwell or not unable to do something, I think they were just thinking I was lazy. So my home life then got a little bit affected by my condition. I didn't feel like I wanted to be opening up to family and friends about how I felt. So the medication I take at the moment are mycophenolate, which is 100,000 mg twice a day, along with there's one other which I can't remember now, but I do take a fair amount, and because there's a lot of protein that I am leaking through my kidney at the moment, I may go on to cyclophosphamide. I can't really say that, treat that medication very well. So that has been proposed to me, and I have had the talks with my doctor about that medication, because apparently it is proven to reduce the leak of protein in your urine. So I am in the process of transitioning through a new treatment plan. But I think for me personally, when I was diagnosed, because there was nothing out there, it's nice that, now that I know a few people and I know people who have lupus, it's good that the charity itself, the Lupus UK, is actually putting a lot of materials out there for patients like us to read. Because at first I had no idea. My GP didn't really give me any resources, neither did my hospital. It was all on my own. So I find that now there's more of us that's readily available to talk and support each other, that it does now bring a bit more confidence in me that there's more people like me out there, and there's more people like me that would want to help. So I would like to first of all say thank you for everybody being here and showing us that, we can all do this together, and thank you to the charity for all the materials you put out there for us, because it really does help. So thank you.
Thank you, Santhia, and thank you so much for sharing your experiences, because it's so important to be able to hear those personal experiences of living with lupus, and helping to understand exactly what that means, sort of living with the disease, and we can only do that by listening to people from their first hand. So actually we've had a question come up, so I just wonder if it was to Rashmika, and I wonder if you'd be able to answer this. So somebody's asked, were you able to, they said, wash off the effects of steroids, and if so, how? So how did you sort of get past the need for the steroids?
The 40 milligrams. Yeah, the 40 milligrams. Initially, they were tapered by 5 milligrams until I got to 10. And then after 10 milligrams, then it was tapered down over, well, the fives, when we tapered down by 5 milligrams, they were done like 3 monthly. When I tapered down on the smaller amounts, like 2.5 milligram tablets, I was down to 7.5 at one stage. And after that, it was a case of more than 6 to 8 months before I could change and come down any further. Then when it comes towards the end, I had about a good 1.5 or 2 years coming down to 2 and 1 milligrams alternate days. And then not last year, 2019, just before the pandemic, in December, I had a clinical appointment, and with that appointment, my consultant decided, because I personally did tell my consultant I want to come off steroids if I can, because I was on such a low dose of 1 milligrams. I don't know how much effect it was having, or whether it was doing anything at all. So he then said that we'll do the test to see whether my own body is making prednisolone. And as it was, he then gave a report to say that after my appointment letter, when the bloods came back, he said that I could come off them. So I came off steroids altogether in February of 2020, and I've not had to go back on since. I don't want to go back on them, is the case. I'll be determined to have not to start them for any reason.
Right.
I've been off them now, and I did about 6 months into that. I think maybe I had an effect of them because I suddenly got trigger fingers, but I later found out myself that it was because I was taking some of the vitamin supplements, B12, on too high a dose, and so that has now gone away. So I came back.
Thank you ever so much, Rashmika, for answering that. So if you've got any more questions for Rashmika and Santhia, then please pop them in the chat, and we'll come to those again at the end of this afternoon's event. So next up, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Kanta Kumar, who is a lecturer at the University of Birmingham and an honorary professor at PGI India. And Kanta has developed a profile of research around the issues related to ethnicity in musculoskeletal condition practice and behavioural medicine. She has a track record of publications in this area of work. So Kanta, you're going to be speaking about the role of ethnicity in perceiving lupus.
Thank you, Paul. Let me just try and share. I hope that was successful. Can everybody see that?
Yep, we can see that.
So I just need to, oh, have I come out of it?
Nope, you're still in there. Perfect.
Okay, brilliant. Just let me know, as Anisur said, and let me know because I can't see anybody now. So do let me know if I am not visible. Is everything okay?
Yes, it looks fine, Kanta.
Brilliant. Okay, so thank you, Lupus UK and Paul, for setting up this launch for Yeh Hai Lupus. And I'll be talking to you about the role of ethnicity in perceiving lupus. I think those of you who are very familiar with treating and diagnosing lupus, you would agree that there has been significant advances over the past 2 decades. And generally in rheumatology, we have lots of advances in the way we diagnose and treat our patients, and we have lots of options. And we've heard Rashmika and Santhia talk about those options, which is great that, you know, patients can have a lot of more leeway in their management. which is absolutely fantastic. And, you know, this is across the world, particularly in developed countries, and developing countries are still catching up on those advances. But it has to be said that in these advances, we still have a lot more room to play with improving the clinical outcomes of the ethnic minority population in terms of accessing healthcare, engagement, disease management, education, adhering to treatments. These all remain an issue that we need to address yet. So the dream of a healthcare professional in developing these models perhaps is still on the wish list, a model that really addresses the engagement, adherence, and the disease education. A model perhaps that talks to the framework what patient will understand, and a model that a clinician can use to really portray the opportunities that weigh up the risks in a meaningful way for the patients. I'm just going to take you back to the 90s, and I know Professor Caroline Gordon is on the call. When she joined in the 90s, there was a pool of evidence with her, together with lots of people around the world, really highlighting who is this disease attacking, and Anisur also shed some light in whom is this disease attacking. Then in the early 2000s, we started to look at the additional challenges of ethnicity in SLE that we needed to address. And really this pile of evidence that was created by Professor Gordon and lots of others around the world really highlighted the key thing, which was that it was more frequent in Afro-Caribbean, Asian, and had Hispanic individuals compared with white Europeans. And as Anisur also highlighted, that the key message was that the disease in the Black, Asian, minority ethnic populations, that the disease was severe and it had more destructive disease for these populations. In the 2000, start off of the 2000, we had this data, and we were very aware of these differences that exist, and there particularly was a concern for those clinicians working in hospitals where there was intense ethnicity: Birmingham, Blackburn, Manchester, Leicester, Coventry. You can think of some of those yourselves, Southall, as some others around Leeds, for example. So we set off our aim to really understand, how do patients make sense? How do patients, particularly from ethnic backgrounds, make sense of SLE? It's complex. You've heard Rashmika, Cynthia, and Anisur saying how complex this disease is. What we didn't have much understanding, how do ethnic minority population, particularly the South Asian people, perceive this, and how do they engage with their medication? So having that knowledge on our hands, we set off initially to look at the beliefs about medicines in patients, and we did look at this in two disease groups at the time, in rheumatoid and SLE. And what that data showed us that point is, on the right hand side, you can see where we asked patients their views about the need for their medication. And you will see in both disease groups and in both ethnic groups, everybody agreed that these medications were very, very important. But if we look at the concerns of the ethnic groups, the South Asian patients in both disease groups felt that they had higher concerns about these particular medications that they were using to control their SLE. In parallel to that, we also obtained their views about their general medicines, for that could be their cholesterol lowering or blood pressure tablets. And you'll find that the South Asian patients, particularly in both disease groups, said that, you know, general medicines in generally were overused and harmful. So we found that very interesting. And then again, particularly for those clinicians working in these areas where there was intense ethnicity. We set ourselves an aim really for the future then, adding as research is that it always evolves, and always when you answer one question, another one stands in your way. We wanted to understand these balancing acts that patients did with these necessities and concerns. What was it about these hired hearers who were really engaging with the clinicians? Why were they putting these necessities up here and downplaying their concerns? And what was it about those low adherers, you know, where they were raising their concerns to peak and downplaying those concerns, about downplaying those necessities rather. We set up a study to look at that in more detail as well. And to that effect, we did come up with these 4 points listed here. Now, when you look at these, and when I've presented this before, people have said, well, these could be applied across the board. These don't necessarily need to apply to South Asian backgrounds. You are absolutely right that these could be applied across. But in comparison, when we do compare, these factors listed here do become more troublesome for the South Asian patients for whatever reason. More importantly, you've heard Anisur saying how complex this disease is and different organs that it impacts on. You've heard Cynthia also saying some serious facts that she's come across. But in our studies that we have done, it's interesting that every time we talked about lupus, the life-threatening this disease could have on patient was really downplayed, which was quite worrying for clinicians. So that begs a question that, are we using a platform that really uses the opportunity in a framework that allows the patients to weigh up the risks and the benefits of treatments in the way that it might be okay for an English-speaking or from a white background? Let's look at this in more detail, understanding of disease. When you look at the maroon or the burgundy boxes below, when clinicians see people agreeing with them, this is basically a biomedical model, isn't it? Everybody agrees, and it's easy to have discussions with this cohort of people where they marry up and they agree with the clinician's advice. But here is the challenge when patients walk into clinic with these views hidden behind when you see them in clinic or when patients present in clinic. These are the ones perhaps more when you are prescribing and talking about SLE, but something else is going on in the background of in their minds. So when we look at the strategies, again, if you look at the burgundy box here below, is more a doable exercise that you can really engage with the patient. You can hold the dialogue and really bring them to some sort of self-management as well as their treatment. But I present to you the data that we had and is published, more challenges to the clinic consultation. And it begs a question that even up to today in 2021, how do we actually address some of these given the time limit that we have in clinic? So it begs a question that actually the balancing acts and these things that we think that are applicable across the board could be different to populations. So your high adherers and necessity, people who could weigh up and downplay their concerns, maybe you don't have to work so hard for them because automatically they're coming in with a biomedical framework that matches with yours in clinic. But sometimes it doesn't happen always, and this is what you're facing with the challenge. However, how good are we at addressing those challenges in clinic? And that's the question that we still ask ourselves today. In 90s, we had data on prevalence, we had data, and we're still having data on severe disease and poor outcomes for ethnic minority patients. We further have added perceptions and beliefs, cultural influences, adherence to medication, their willingness to take medication, engagement, and perhaps the living with the long-term disease is a problem. Now, more recently, we're in 2021 and we learn that SLE for South Asian patients has a massive impact on their work too. We can't change the prevalence. This will carry on. When we talk about the disease severity and poor outcomes, people like Professor Gordon and Anisur might lean towards the genetics. Is there something in the genetics that can explain? And there is data that explains that there are core genetic reasons for the severity and poor outcomes. But we cannot ignore the factors that patients bring into clinic. We need to address the other factors that can ultimately have, if there is absence of genetics, how does the disease get so severe and how do we end up with such poor outcomes? We do need to reflect on those outcomes as well that patients bring, on those factors that patients bring into clinic. This is an opportunity, Yeh Hai Lupus video, which Mandeep will talk to you about. We have pulled in all our thinking and our concepts into this platform, and Mandeep will talk to you more about that.
Thank you very much, Kanta. So next up, we've got Mandeep Ubhi, who is a research associate at the University of Birmingham, and she is going to be talking about the rationale behind developing the video and going through some of the contents of this new resource for Hindi-speaking patients. So over to you, Mandeep.
Brilliant, thank you, Paul. I'm just going to share this presentation. Okay, I hope that everybody can see that. So welcome everyone. My name is Mandeep Ubhi, and I'd just like to extend my thanks to Paul and to Lupus UK for hosting this event and the speakers that we've heard from so far. So we've just been hearing Dr. Kumar talking to us about the role of ethnicity in lupus, and my role is to tell you what's included in the video that we've developed. However, before I do, I'd like to tell you about our team and the results of a study that we conducted. Okay, so this is the team who are all part of the grant and who have all contributed to the development of Yeh Hai Lupus. So we are a team of clinicians and researchers and academics, and we have a patient partner, Rashmika, who we've met today already. And I'll talk more about everybody's role as we go through. So in 2019, Lupus UK awarded us a grant to look at the impact of lupus on work for people of South Asian origin. So we conducted a qualitative study with patients in the West Midlands that provided some real rich and useful data. But before discussing the results of that study, I'd first like to tell you some information that you may be surprised by. That when we conducted a literature review of 20 studies exploring the relationship between lupus and work, we realised that South Asian patients were hugely underrepresented. None of these studies included large samples of South Asian patients, and nor did they capture any cultural issues or barriers to remaining in work. So we've heard from Professor Rahman and Dr. Kumar have just spoken about the implications of lupus. But let's look at the impact of this from a clinical and an academic perspective. We really don't know how the working lives of people from this particular ethnic background are affected. So this was a timely opportunity for us to do something more for this group. And we're proud to have generated some results in this way. And I'll talk you through those now. So 4 themes came out of our qualitative study, and the first 3 were factors that impacted work ability, and the 4th, recommendations for improvement. So in the first theme, patients discussed the impact of lupus on their work. They talked about the nature of the discussions they were having with their clinical team and about the concerns they were having because they needed to take frequent time off for hospital appointments. In the second theme, employment-related factors, patients talked about the lack of awareness of lupus in their workplaces. They talked about the variable support received from their employers and their occupational health departments, and the adjustments that they had to make just to stay at work. Notably, in the third theme, cultural and personal related factors, patients discussed the lack of lupus awareness in their homes and their South Asian community. They talked about the stigma that came with having a health condition and discussed the importance of family support. And finally, in the fourth theme, patients highlighted the need for specific work and lupus related discussions with their clinicians and their employers. And here also was the discussion about the potential value of a video resource to help non-English speaking family members understand the overall impact of lupus. And on this slide, we can see some examples of patient quotes with regards to this. And the real key point here is that's being highlighted is this language barrier between patients and other people in their households, their parents or their in-laws. So for example, somebody saying, my mum can't read, write or speak in English, and I can't speak Punjabi very well. If there was a video, this would help them to know what I'm going through. So really patients are asking the question, how do I get the message across to the people that I live with about what I'm experiencing? So we followed the process of what typically happens when a study is complete, and a poster has been submitted to the British Society for Rheumatology conference taking place next month, and a revised manuscript is being prepared for the Lupus Journal. But as a team, we wanted to do more, so we set about developing the Yeh Hai Lupus video. So this video is developed for the patient benefit, and we've been talking today about why that's necessary. It's just under half an hour long, so a half an hour opportunity for patients and their families to really engage, and awareness can be raised in the South Asian community by watching this video. And a key point here is that it's not only for first generation non-English speaking patients, but as we saw in the previous slide, it's for second and third generation patients who said they'd use it to educate their family members as well. So this new resource is something that we want all clinicians, healthcare professionals, community leaders to signpost their patients to. Next, I'll be talking to you about the development process. So we worked with the Creative Media Department at the University of Birmingham and developed this video in Hindi. And it was filmed on the university campus in November last year, 2020, in a socially distanced way, or at home for those that couldn't make it to the studio. And really using the expertise that's within our team and taking what the patients told us would be useful for this video. Specific chapters have been very carefully developed, and I'll be going through those in the next few slides. So what's included in this video resource? So firstly, Paul, who we all know, starts us off with an introduction in English about wanting to reach out to the South Asian community in the UK, and about providing support in this culturally relevant way. And from here on in, the rest of the video is in Hindi, with English subtitles. And as I go on to explain in my introduction, the idea of this video is that the whole family can watch this together. Okay, so chapter 1. So Dr. Shirish Dubey provides a really nice introduction into lupus, how it develops, who it's likely to affect, and how it can affect the body. We then move on to the diagnosis and the clinical team who might be involved in the management of lupus. And then there's information on the range of symptoms and the severity of these that patients might experience. And Dr. Dubey then explains also about the different types of drugs that are used for treatment. And finally just finishes off this chapter with the importance of informing family members about this diagnosis. So chapter 2 then, medication related facts. Dr. Kumar talks to us here about how pharmaceutical medicines are used to help control lupus, and how treatment has improved over recent years to better manage the disease. And as she mentioned earlier, Dr. Kumar's previous research into understanding the health beliefs of South Asian patients revealed that they considered Western medicines as harmful and overused, and as a result could stop taking long-term medication. We know as well that some patients like to use Ayurvedic or traditional herbal treatments. And in this chapter, Dr. Kumar advises discussing this and any other concerns with clinicians, and perhaps bringing family members along to hospital appointments for support. So chapter 3 then is disease and diet related facts with Dr. Dubey. And Dr. Dubey talks here about other ways to help manage lupus, such as the importance of a healthy diet, not smoking, and taking regular exercise. And Dr. Dubey also discusses some of the side effects of medications and certain triggers that could cause lupus to flare up, and how patients could try to prevent these or manage them where possible. So chapter 4 is social related facts. And just to say here really, the following sections have been heavily influenced by our team as we all discussed the themes of the study. So our clinical team, such as Professor Caroline Gordon, Doctors Tom Sheeran, Toshi Adesi and John Reynolds, all felt that what patients said resonated with them, and the information in clinics really wasn't being delivered in a culturally sensitive way. So the text was very carefully planned out to deliver these culturally relevant messages in the video. So this chapter then provides advice on managing cultural issues and the expectations that some South Asian families may have. For example, we're looking at the traditional role of a daughter-in-law and attending big events such as weddings and religious festivals that are quite common in the South Asian community. And finally, there's advice here on managing the stigma that surrounds having lupus. So chapter 5, working with lupus. Again, this section has been very heavily influenced by our team members. So Dr. Stephen Sadra is a reader at the University in Occupational Health. Joe Adams is a professor in musculoskeletal health. Dr. Rachel Jordan is an epidemiologist, and Dr. Kerry Allen is a medical sociologist at the University of Birmingham. So in this chapter, I explain how patients can continue working with lupus and highlight the importance of discussing issues with clinicians and employers. There's also advice on returning to work after illness and how to claim disability benefit if this just isn't possible. And finally, as long as the job type is suitable, the benefits of remaining at work are discussed. So we've already heard from Rashmika, and Rashmika was a patient partner for the study. And in this section, we have a role play between the two of us. So where we've been able to draw on the results, Rashmika has been able to contextualise these from a patient perspective, telling her story about living and working with lupus. So this starts, much like we've heard today, from the time of diagnosis, and Rashmika's family concerns for her at this time, how she has managed to change the medication, how her family been able to support her at home, and the importance of maintaining a work-life balance. And finally, in this section, Rashmika talks about the adjustments that she's made and her employer has made for her at work to accommodate her condition. So chapter 7 then is research in lupus. So Dr. Kumar talks to us about how research is used to inform new treatments and clinical practice, and also really shines a light on the importance of people from different backgrounds taking part in research, so that it can be better understood how to serve different populations. And the final chapter is back to Rashmika with her message for newly diagnosed patients, that despite the challenges that lupus brings, you can still have a positive outlook. And this can be achieved by understanding lupus, communicating with your medical team, joining a support group to be around others with a shared experience, and adjusting your lifestyle and pacing yourself. And this chapter is really designed to reassure patients at the end of the video that with certain adjustments, it is possible to live and work with lupus. So now over to you. So like I said, it's just under half an hour long, and it's an opportunity really for patients to sit with their families and really engage in a culturally appropriate way that will provide real world patient benefit. So at this stage, I urge all clinicians and community leaders to signpost new and follow-up patients at clinics to this resource, again, not only for the non-English speaking patients, but for the English speaking patients to give to their families who are not acculturated in this country. So after today, Lupus UK will engage in patient focused coverage, which Paul has touched on already, to really advertise this resource. But if you do have any colleagues who might find this information relevant, then please direct them to this video or to Paul, because this is a new resource. It's set within a cultural context and is very relevant to the patients that it's been designed to serve. And throughout the rest of this year and into 2022, this video will be disseminated to the heart of the South Asian community as well. And our team feel very strongly about the fact that, surprisingly, in this day and age, there is no other resource like this that exists for people from a South Asian background. And like we've heard already, Professor Gordon will tell you that she's been working with South Asian patients in Birmingham for over 30 years. And this resource really is very well overdue. And just to make you aware, the story hasn't stopped here. We have planned a larger piece of content that's been submitted and is under review. But for now, we really hope that this resource will be well received. And crucially, the success and the reach of this depends on everybody here. So please ensure that you signpost your patients, signpost your colleagues, and spread the word. So thank you very much for your attention. I'll pass you back to Paul.
Thank you ever so much, Mandeep. And yes, absolutely, the word of this event now is that we want to get this new resource shared as widely as possible. So thank you so much for giving us that insight into it. And Yeah, so next up we've got Dr. Shirish Dubey, who is a consultant rheumatologist based in Oxford University Hospital NHS Trust and who is attached to Oxford University, and Dr. John Reynolds, who is a senior lecturer at University of Birmingham and rheumatology consultant at Sandwell West Birmingham Hospitals NHS Trust. And they're going to be discussing the importance of having information resources such as this for them in their clinic and for the patients that they see and help manage their conditions. So over to Shirish and John.
Thanks, Paul. I'll get started and then John will take over from me in a few minutes' time. So I'm not going to talk much, but I just wanted to share a few thoughts with you. Let me get my slides up. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see them.
Now, before I start, one thing I do want to say is that we've lived through COVID now for 12 months. We've been in lockdown for 12 months, more or less. And the impact of ethnicity on certain conditions, we've had so much in the media about the impact. So we are living and breathing ethnicity and the impact of certain conditions on different ethnic populations. When we started doing this, actually, we were in a much grayer world. The understanding of this was at a much earlier stage. And I must thank Lupus UK for actually funding this endeavor, because at that time, there was really no real reason for them to actually fund this, given that there has very little been done. So to actually fund a study to look at the impact of this and to develop some resources to try and help Asian patients was very creditable from Lupus UK. So in terms of talking about work, now work instability is very common in lupus. And when you're doing a lupus clinic and you ask people, how is work? There are a lot of people who will say, oh, I'm coping, or this and that and the other. And when you start probing into greater detail, you realize that actually they have a lot of issues at work and they've just not been addressed. That is true for Caucasian patients as well. And South Asian patients just seem to get it a little bit worse. And of course, there are a number of reasons why work is such an important issue. Firstly, it keeps them skilled, keeps them doing something and contributing to society as well as to their families. But of course, from a lupus point of view, they are actually quite challenged because lupus not only has an impact on what they are able to deliver, but also has an impact on their education, on their training and the skills that they are able to develop. Professor Rahman was talking about reduced life expectancy, and that is an issue. There are the mental barriers of living with a chronic condition, which potentially has an impact on your life. And of course, there is reduced productivity from fatigue, from brain fog, from days when you just can't do anything, days when you're in too much pain. There is increased absenteeism, there is increased presenteeism. And so there are a lot of challenges. When you think about South Asian patients, they just seem to have the perfect storm. So the particular set of circumstances around cultural factors means that they feel less supported from family and friends. A lot of them actually often withdraw from friends. So they don't really have a good support network. They don't really feel that they can talk to their families or to their children and explain this to them. They also tend to withdraw from society to a large extent. And we've seen how lack of integration into society is a problem with COVID, but it's equally a problem with lupus. And so far, there has been very little dedicated support for South Asian patients with lupus. So this is actually the first resource we've created. The purpose of this exercise was basically a shout out to the patients that we are with you and we understand how you feel. And this is our way of saying we may not be able to help you with your individual circumstances all of the time, but we are trying to do our best to help you. We are trying to increase awareness of the particular set of circumstances which makes life so difficult for these people. And we are trying to explain to people, particularly from different backgrounds who don't necessarily have the same understanding, to try and explain to them as to why this is so important and why it's so bad for South Asians. Thereby, we hope that there is improved compassion and understanding amongst these healthcare providers. We also want to raise awareness and improve understanding amongst employers and relatives and friends. We would like to encourage people with lupus to build on their support networks and hope that people find it useful and signpost other people to look at this as well. It is, of course, freely available, and this is the internet age, so everyone will be able to download videos and watch them whenever they have a bit of spare time. It is worth bearing in mind that these videos don't really encompass everything. They are broad videos which will provide an overview, but there will be more tailored advice that you would need from time to time, which we may not be able to provide from these videos. So you may have to talk to your clinicians to provide you more meaningful advice for that particular set of circumstances. There is clearly further work that needs to be done. And depending on the feedback from this piece of work, we will develop further resources. And we hope to improve outcome data relating to ethnicity and provide more robust support mechanisms and networks to improve quality of life for these people. That is fundamental to what we are trying to do at the moment. I'm going to stop at this point and hand over to John. But before I do, I want to say a huge thank you to firstly to Lupus UK for funding this work and all members of the team who've been involved with this work. Now, this work was done primarily when I was based in Coventry as compared to when I was in Oxford. And it is very interesting as to how different the support networks and understanding and adherence, etc., is from Coventry to Oxford.
Okay, thank you, Shirish. I'm just going to share my screen. I just have just a few slides, not so many. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can see that.
Perfect. So as Shirish mentioned, I'm a rheumatologist at City Hospital in Birmingham, and for those people who aren't familiar, it's a site that well deserves its name. It's based right in the city centre of Birmingham, and you can see that Birmingham is a large city with a large urban population, and that's reflected in some of the patients that we see. And Birmingham is very much a diverse city. This is data from the 2011 census comparing Birmingham to the rest of England, and what you can see is that we have a significant increase in ethnic populations, and particularly within the South Asian population. So we're serving a broad group of patients, and this is reflected not just in the population of Birmingham, but also in our lupus cohort. So this is data from Professor Gordon from 2010, showing the distribution of the different ethnicities within our population. And you can see that it kind of maps onto the overall population of Birmingham, although we have slightly higher numbers of Afro-Caribbean patients, but a significant proportion of our patients are from South Asian backgrounds. So I tried to have a think about some of the challenges that I've faced over the last couple of years looking after lupus patients, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't make this a generalization, but just to give you some of my personal views. And something that's particularly been a problem, as you may imagine, is a language barrier. Some of my patients don't speak particularly good English or find it difficult to understand English. And in my experience, a number of these patients also don't particularly like formal translation services and would prefer to have a family member translating for them. As Kanta's already mentioned, we know that some of these patients have different ideas about their medication, and it's not always clear to me as the clinician that they fully understand why I'm recommending particular treatments, and that can and certainly feed into problems around adherence. My personal experience is that patients from South Asian backgrounds may be less likely to be involved in shared decision making. Some patients prefer a more paternalistic approach, and that can be a challenge. And certainly there are differences in expectations from what the patient expects and what I expect as a clinician. We often find that we have quite different ideas about things, and things that I assume might be important to the patient may not be that important at all, and there are other things that they value more highly. So when we have a patient in front of us, it's sometimes very easy just to focus on the person sitting in front of us, but it's also really important to remember that patients have quite a complex background, and they're interacting with us during the consultation, and they may have their partner with them, and sometimes they'll have family members with them, and we'll have a conversation across the whole group, but that the patient's also having to interact with other people with regards to their illness, particularly as Shirish mentioned, their employers. And this all then sits on top of a background where there are expectations from other family members, there are specific issues around perhaps religious beliefs or the local community, or stigma of a long-term illness. So there's a lot of background here that perhaps as clinicians we're not always fully aware of. So it's very important that we support our patients as much as possible. I took these photographs yesterday from within our quite empty COVID secure department, and these are the Lupus UK information leaflets, which many of you will be familiar with. And although they're a fantastic resource, they are of course only in English. And it wasn't actually until I had a conversation with Shirish yesterday that he made the very important point that even if they were written in other languages, a proportion of our patients, although they can speak Punjabi, for example, may not be able to read or write it. And this is a book that I have on my bookshelf, which I took down because when I was a young and enthusiastic medical student, I took a course in Punjabi to try and help me to communicate better with my patients. And I'm sorry to say that I didn't really keep it up. And even if I had, I still don't think I would have been in a position where I could have explained the intricacies of living with a diagnosis like lupus with any certainty. And as we kind of talked about on a previous slide, actually this probably isn't enough, because just being able to communicate clearly to the patients doesn't take into account all of this other stuff that's happening in the background. And I thought I was quite culturally savvy, so in preparation for today I took an online quiz from the London School of International Communication, which was a cultural awareness quiz. And I have to say, I'm too embarrassed to tell you my score, but it certainly wasn't as high as I thought it was going to be. So why do I think that this kind of resource is important? Well, first and foremost, it's about empowering the patient and helping them to understand their condition and helping them to get involved with decisions about their care. I think it's really important, as well as having resources that are available in the appropriate language, that they are culturally sensitive. And one of the things I particularly like about the Yeh Hai Lupus videos is that some of our patients, particularly Rashmika, has been involved, and I think that kind of peer-led support is extremely important. And because it's an online resource, it can be accessible anytime or anywhere. And I think it's going to be something that's appreciated by the patients, but also going to be widely shared within their friends and families to help their close friends and their loved ones understand a bit more about their condition. I think that's all I have to say, and I think that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you ever so much to both Shirish and to John there for sharing their views as clinicians. That's wonderful. So we've reached the end of the agenda for this afternoon's event. So what I'd like to do is open up the opportunity for any questions. So if anybody has got a question that they would like to ask any of the panel of speakers, from today, then you can either pop a question into the chat, or if you want to either raise your hand or just come off, put your camera on and come off mute and ask a question, then we'd be very happy to answer any questions. We have got a few minutes for that. I think I'll just kick it off. There was one question that came up in the chat, which was, I think, primarily for Rashmika, but it would be also good to have the input of perhaps Shirish or John on this. And someone was asking, do the side effects of steroids get better once you are off them? So things like weight gain and blurred vision, do they improve after you've been able to withdraw from the steroids? So perhaps Rashmika, you can share your experiences, and then Shirish or John can share more generally.
Blurred vision wasn't something that I had any problems with when I was on the steroids. Obviously, having the 40 milligrams at the start, well, my face did balloon out. Obviously, after that, and coming down and coming off gradually over the 10 years, I didn't really get in the way of side effects from the steroids. Maybe they haven't kicked in as yet because I've only recently come off, so I couldn't say anything on that. But hydroxychloroquine is something that I take, and for that, yes, we get our eyes tested, but mine seem to be okay at the moment.
Okay, Santhia has something to add there, I think.
Yeah, it's just my personal experience on steroids. So I did take steroids when I first started my medication. So I started on 60 mg of prednisolone, and I was, because it was the first time, I reacted quite badly, but I was still consistent with my medication. I think it was within 3 to 4 months is when we tampered it down to 40. So it was, again, a bit of a drop. And thereafter, I think it was every 3 to 4 weeks, every time I went to the hospital, we tampered it down every 5 milligrams. The side effects I did have is my eyesight did worsen slightly. I mean, I'm short-sighted anyway, but my sight, it did worsen, but I don't know if that's because of prednisolone, we weren't too sure. Weight gain, yes, I did gain a bit of weight around the face, but then as it tampered down, it did decrease. So that was my experience with steroids, and I'm so glad I am off it, and I've been off it for 2 years, and I think I'm going to be back on it next month. But yeah, it wasn't a pleasant experience, to be honest with you, especially when I hear other patients who say they started off on 40 or 10, and you know, taking one, some are still taking 1 mg right now. I just wish I was given a little bit of opportunity just to ease in rather than go straight into deep end, because it did affect my work life, it did affect my social life. I did stay away from everything. I didn't want to go out because it was a big sudden change in everything in my life. So yes, you do get a bit chubby when you take prednisolone. Thank you.
Hand it over to Shirish and John. Are you able to share perhaps anything generally in lupus patients when they're withdrawing from steroids?
So I think one of the differences that I have seen in working within Midlands to working within Oxford is that in Oxford we are much keener on withdrawing steroids completely. I think that's generally the trend all over the country, I think. And in terms of side effects from steroids, I think weight gain is a difficult one, because steroids do make you gain weight, but they also change your shape. The shape change will actually revert back once you're down on the steroids and once you come off steroids. The gain in weight will get better if you're able to exercise enough. So it's dependent on what you're able to do at the end when you are off the steroids. And with regards to the vision, that's a difficult one because it depends on what's causing the blurring of vision. So sometimes you can get complications such as cataracts and things of that sort. So if that is the case, then cataracts are not going to get better just because you've come off steroids. So it is quite variable. So you need to understand what's causing the problem.
Okay, thank you very much, Shirish. And we've not had any more questions come up in the chat at the moment. So if there's anyone who's watching and they want to ask a question of any of our panel here, please pop your hand up or just come off mute and would be happy to. Oh, we've got a question there from Adjovi. Do you want to ask a question, please?
Hello, thank you for allowing me to talk, and that was an interesting presentation. I'm just a bit worried about other ethnic background, because I know you've got a video on in Hindu at the moment, but is there any kind of consideration going on to provide a video that will be a wide range available for other ethnic group, please?
Certainly. So I think that that's a really good question, and I think that the plan hopefully would be to make resources available for various different communities living within the UK as sort of their need is presented. So this video came out of a particular research project which really identified barriers to having the best quality of care and being able to maintain employment for people from a South Asian community. And we really hope that it is going to result in more research by other researchers across the UK looking at the role of ethnicity. And I think that hopefully from the past year, with the COVID pandemic showing the disproportionate impact on Black and minority ethnic groups and the Black Lives Matter movements, we are going to see much more of a drive to really understand the role of ethnicity in health and identifying those health inequalities. So I think that probably initially we need to do some more work as a charity and as researchers to understand what those inequities people are facing because of their heritage, their cultural background and their ethnicity. And when we can really sort of get a better understanding and involve people more from those groups, then we can develop resources that will hopefully help to break those down. So whether it's similar to this project where videos are an ideal resource because they the spoken word language is more important than the written language because of not being able to understand the written language for some people, or whether it's other interventions such as having more information and awareness events at particular clinics, opportunities to speak to sort of cultural leaders or clinicians from a particular ethnic background and you know, have a question and answer session. I think we're very open as an organisation to understanding what those different new interventions will be, and I think that it's an exciting time for the organisation. And I noticed that Kanta's put her hand up, so I'll just pass over to her for a moment.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, and Paul and whoever asked the question, that's a very valid one, that there ought to be more resources available in different languages, and I'm sure Lupus UK will carry on supporting this. But just to let people know that we are developing a training program for clinicians further, so this work is actually just in a nutshell here, but more work is going on where we are looking at a training program for clinicians to engage with ethnic minority patients in consultations. So watch that space. That will be hopefully appearing latter part of 2022.
Thank you, Kanta. So hopefully that's...
Can I just add something that only, sorry, as an idea? When I was due to be practice nurse, in order to engage a patient, we come up with an idea of having a patient-led group. And that can be something that we can look at, like probably due to the pandemic now, we've come across how to do things online. So that could be kind of a video webinar that we can have, and with just patient-led, where they can share experiences and be able to educate each other, because that's the best way for, and then they'll be able to, probably someone might be able to find their kind of ethnic background patients in there, and then be able to communicate in their own languages, because that's one of the way that they can improve their condition as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think patient user groups are very useful, and we've done them, and we do have them, and it's a good way of getting people alike, particularly when they're newly diagnosed, signpost them. So, for example, if Rashmika is working for Lupus UK and so is Santhia, so you might signpost them even to people outside your networks, just to share the experience. So that's a very useful thing to do, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
No problem. So is there anyone else who's got any questions that they would like to ask? Oh, I think Rashmika's put her hand up.
Yeah, for the person that asked that other question, there is the Health Unlocked, which through Lupus UK, people can chat with other patients about their conditions and experiences and get helpful ideas and tips about how their medications compare with other people's and side effects. And really, there is, like Paula said before, Health Unlocked is a good community-based chat where they have also other chat groups as well on there. So that's where the patients need to be signposted to as well, until further literature and videos, etc., come out for the various different vein group patients.
Thanks, Rashmika. Yeah, so we do have an online forum, and we have got some groups who have been doing virtual support group meetings. So if you are interested in chatting to other people online, then please get in touch with Lupus UK, or if it's something that you are interested in starting, then as well, please send us an email, because we're very flexible and keen to engage with anyone who wants to start some activity in the community. I think that having an opportunity to speak to other people with lupus and with appreciation of cultural similarities is very helpful. I think just last week when Rashmika and Santhia met for the first time with me just to prepare for this webinar, it was a lovely chat. They'd not met each other before, and I could see sparks straight away and sharing of advice with one another. So I'm always a keen advocate for peer support meetings of any kind. So if there's I'll just wait a minute just to see if anyone else is going to raise their hand with a question. I'll just give you another few seconds. Okay, so it looks like that might be the end of our question and answer session, and we're actually very close to the time that we're scheduled to finish. So what I would just like to do is sort of wrap up the event for today. I'd like to say a massive thank you to our guest speakers, everyone who's prepared a presentation. Oh, that's my cat. Everyone who's prepared, and especially for the team that's put all the work into developing this new resource. So thank you so much to Kanta and Mandeep for all of their work, and to everyone who contributed to the video, which is now available. And so we'd love your help in sharing the word. Our next step as Lupus UK is to start spreading the word more and more to patients, making them aware of the new available resource, and to also reach out additionally to more healthcare providers and clinicians to make sure that they're aware of it, so that they can signpost to patients and their families. So please join us in doing that. We've got some posts scheduled for our social media for 5 o'clock today, if you want to go and share those straight away. And we'll be sharing a lot more over the coming weeks and months. And I really hope that this is just the start of this new resource, that Yeh Hai Lupus video will lead on to additional video resources for the South Asian community, more community outreach, and also that we'll be able to do more resources for anyone with lupus over the months and years to come. So thank you ever so much for joining us, and I hope you all stay safe. Take care of one another.